What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We are watching this area of interest entering the Caribbean Sea in the next few days, as well as another area of interest that is losing a little bit of steam out here in the eastern Atlantic, as well as another zone over here that we're paying attention to right here off the coast of Texas. So we're going to have to pay attention to all of this and cover everything that we have going on so far as we are continuing to watch the tropics starting to wake up, and as we are especially watching this area of interest over here, because it's looking to me now that it's going to be more of a long-term threat, especially for those in the Western Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, and we absolutely have to watch this. So let's go ahead and go into it from the NHC website. We're going to go ahead and start with this one since this does pose a significant threat, although we will definitely cover this area of interest off the coast of Texas. So here we go. A tropical wave located several hundred miles east of the Lesser Antilles continues to produce some disorganized showers and thunderstorms. The disturbance is forecast to move westward and reach the Lesser Antilles on Monday, then continue across the eastern and central Caribbean Sea through the middle part of next week. Later next week, the environmental conditions appear to become more conducive for development, and a tropical depression could form as the system moves across the Western Caribbean Sea. 40% chance of formation in the next 7 days, so we're going to have to keep close tabs on it. It looks like they keep pushing this further and further out to the west, which that is raising more and more red flags for me, mainly because, yes, the Lesser Antilles may not get as much anymore, but now that poses a greater threat for the Yucatan Peninsula, for Belize, for especially Jamaica, as well as parts of Cuba, and even in the Gulf Coast states over here, as long-term this does potentially pose a bigger threat over there, although some uncertainty in the operational and ensemble runs do indicate that there is a possibility this could enter the Yucatan Peninsula and make landfall in northeastern Mexico. But regardless, Gulf Coast needs to be watching this very closely. It needs to be watching this like a hawk. And they also need to watch this system as well. A broad area of low pressure near the upper Texas coast is producing some disorganized showers and thunderstorms along and just offshore the coasts of Texas and Louisiana. Some slow development is possible as it meanders offshore. If it meanders offshore, that is. Regardless of development, heavy rains could cause some flash flooding across portions of the coastal Louisiana and upper Texas coast during the next few days. 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days, so we're going to have to watch this as well, as this does pose a significant flash flooding threat for Texas and Louisiana, so we'll keep an eye on that. And also we have this area of interest. This is going to be going away at around 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight. We have another wave located just to the west of the Cabo Verde Islands producing disorganized shower and thunderstorm activity. Development is no longer expected due to unfavorable conditions as the tropical waves move into the west-northwestward over the eastern and central tropical Atlantic. Ultimately, that's what I'm noticing with this. And this wave over here does appear to be more of like a sacrificial wave, where it's definitely going to, at least especially in terms of the dry air aspect, it's going to help moisten up the atmosphere over there. And there have been some models showing the wave after that organizing and potentially developing, and we will show you that in the ensembles and the operational runs. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and start with the system in the Gulf Coast first, because I think this is a pretty important one to watch, mainly because this does pose a significant flash flooding threat, and I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention, as this looks like it's going to be completely affecting much of the Houston area, affecting much of Louisiana, especially the Lake Charles area, potentially all the way as far east as Houma, Louisiana, and all those areas right there, especially in the coastal part of Louisiana and in the bayous and all that, which could cause some pretty significant flooding over in all these regions right there in Beaumont, Texas, as well as what I'm paying attention to as well. So we're going to have to continue to keep very close tabs on that. The convection continues to remain I'd say, mesoscale in terms of just the fact that it's not expanding in a very large area. It's mesoscale in nature. And we're not seeing a coherent center or coherent deep convection going on, just mainly popping up here and there, boom, 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 and just staying over the Gulf of Mexico. But what that's going to ultimately do long-term is it is going to help continue to moisten up the atmosphere, as there have been a few areas of dry air, at least in the past, and now we're seeing that kind of get tapped up and kind of get taped together and kind of have all that moisture kind of staying in the Gulf of Mexico, and ultimately helping infuse the atmosphere for what's going to be coming down the road. What is coming down the road? Well, we have it right here, the central Atlantic Ocean right here. Here's the situation that we're taking a look at right now. We have this tropical wave right here, currently east of the Lesser Antilles, and I was talking to my guys at Storms United about this. This isn't exactly a tropical wave. It's more or less attached to a monsoonal trough, and it needs to break out first and kind of get its own act together before it organizes and develops. And that's what it's been trying to do all day so far. We have noticed more convection firing up near the center of circulation over here. We have seen some signs of outflow popping up here and there as well in the past. It's not as pronounced as it was before, but it is stuff we need to pay attention to. Regardless, I've been watching it like a hawk because this does pose a potential threat to a lot of people down the road. Lesser Antilles may not seem get as much impacts as I was fearing, which at least in the short term, that is some good news. But one thing I am concerned about is, let's say the system takes its time to organize and develop, and it doesn't do that until it gets to the Central Caribbean Sea. The conditions ahead of that are going to be very favorable for tropical development, and once this thing gets going, it has all the ingredients to really ramp up and intensify at a very alarming rate. Now, in terms of where this is going to be going past Cuba, we do not know just yet. I've seen some models take it to the Yucatan Peninsula, some move it through the Yucatan Strait, and some move it through East Cuba and potentially impacting Florida in the past. It's really going to depend on the strength of the Bermuda High, as the Bermuda High has come back with a vengeance, and the steering currents are what is driving the system into the Caribbean Sea. So that's something we're paying attention to, and it's kind of something that we're going to have to zero in the next few days in order to alert people, hey, something's big is going to be coming. We need to pay attention to this. This wave has been something I've been watching for several days. This wave is something that I think a lot of people have been watching for several days. And to be honest, the setup I'm looking at right here kind of reminds me of Hurricane Ian back in 2022, as well as Hurricane Ida back in 2021, because both of them originated as tropical waves. They took their time organizing and developing. I remember, especially with both of these systems, especially with Ida, they didn't organize until it got into the Western Caribbean Sea, and then things started going off. And that's kind of the thing you see with the systems right here in those kinds of terms, because with a similar setup to what we saw with Ian, and now a similar setup to what we had with Ida, where this system is moving through the Caribbean Sea, starts off as a tropical wave or monsoonal trough, takes its time to organize and develop, starts to get its act together in the Eastern Caribbean Sea, and then finally gets its full act together, has a closed center of circulation, as it gets to the central and western Caribbean seas, right in time for it to enter a very good area of ocean heat content, very warm waters, a ton of moisture, not very much wind shear, and then you see these systems start to rapidly escalate as they approach land. We saw this with Ida in 2021, where it started off as a tropical storm, but then it rapidly escalated and made landfall in Cuba as a Category 1 hurricane. It wasn't even expected to get to that. It was expected to be a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Instead, it was an 85-mile-per-hour Category 1 hurricane as it moved over Cuba, and it was 80 miles per hour when it moved over the Isle of Youth, which is the island off the coast of Cuba. So that's what we had with Ida. And in terms of Ian, we had the system kind of trade organization for strength at first when it was a tropical storm, and then it rapidly intensified to a major hurricane, and then made landfall in Cuba as a Category 3, and then moved towards Florida, rapidly intensified to a Cat 5, slightly weakened to 150. It made landfall as a Cat 4, and that's pretty much where we have in that regard. So that's kind of the stuff we're watching with this tropical wave, and I am seeing a similar pattern to this, at least in the long term right here, especially when you consider the fact that especially with the moisture component, which we will show you right now. Here is the moisture that we're watching right here. Where this system's going to be moving through, there's not going to be very much dry air until it gets to the Eastern Caribbean Sea. It's probably going to take its time getting its act together in there, and then it's going to get a lot better once we move to the Central and Western Caribbean Seas over there, as the moisture continues to inflow and the moisture continues to get better, as well as the fact that you're still going to have very low wind shear hindering this system. The main thing that's really been kind of slowing this development down is the system getting in its own way and the fact that it hasn't really detached from the monsoonal trough just yet. It's definitely trying to do that. It's definitely going to in the next couple of days. The question is, when is it going to start crawling, and then when is it going to start walking? That's the main thing we're paying attention to. It is still moving west, and it is looking like it is trying to get its act together, but it needs to detach from that monsoonal trough first before it can organize into its own tropical cyclone. And that's what we were paying attention to in the eastern Atlantic. Like I said, this was kind of a sacrificial tropical wave, it appears, as now you have a lot more moisture infused in all these areas over here, and you have another tropical wave that's expected to come just off the coast of Africa in the next 12 hours or so that could potentially develop according to some of the models. So this is all stuff we need to pay attention to. Texas, your main threat is flash flooding right now, and same in Louisiana. Lesser Antilles, your main threat is going to be flash flooding as this wave moves through, and hopefully the monsoonal trough stays with it all the way until it gets past there so it doesn't start organizing and developing unexpectedly. And then you have this area of interest that's going to be dying off, and you have a tropical wave coming off that could take advantage of some of the conditions over there. So that's the main stuff we're paying attention to. The reason I look at the small stuff, once again, is because once you start looking at the small stuff and once you start adding them up, they become a much bigger issue. And that's the main thing we're keeping an eye on. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the condition, not in terms of the conditions, but in terms of the satellite imagery. Here's what we have in terms of conditions. We have very warm water once again. We have where this system is sitting at, it's in an area of about 29 to 30 degrees Celsius. It's going to remain pretty much the same until it gets to the Western Caribbean Sea, where things really start to take off, gets up to 30, potentially 31 degrees if it moves further to the north than anticipated, then enters the Gulf of Mexico of similar temperatures, piping hot waters, as well as insane amounts of ocean heat content, which we will get to in just a second. And things continue to get interesting right here. Let's go ahead and show you the ocean heat content. OHC continues to be a very big problem, especially as the system does what I'm a little bit concerned that it might do. What I'm thinking is going to ultimately happen is this is kind of what we were looking at the last couple of days. This does look like it's going to be more of a long-term threat instead of a short-term threat, where the main concern at first, because of how the system was starting to organize and develop, was maybe it becomes a tropical storm before it approaches the Lesser Antilles, moves through the Caribbean Sea, rapidly intensifies, and is already an established hurricane by the time we get to Cuba, the Yucatan, and then eventually the Gulf Coast, as some models have been forecasting it to. I'd say the silver lining with that is at least you'd have more time to prepare, more time to watch this, and kind of more time to react with an established system, instead of what I think is going to be a sneaky system where it's going to kind of be very slow to organize and develop until it gets to the Central Caribbean, starts to go off like that, and then rapidly intensifies, and now you only have 48 hours to act and 48 hours to prepare. Because with an established system like what we saw with Beryl, we saw with Jamaica, they had plenty of time to prepare, and yes, the damage was still absolutely really bad, but ultimately they had more time to prepare, and that reduced the amount of casualties over there. Same with the Yucatan Peninsula. Thankfully, the system Beryl broke down before it approached the Yucatan, and it made landfall as a Cat 2, and it was a very sloppy Category 2. And same thing with Texas. It had more time to prepare. Thank goodness it was only a Category 1 hurricane when it made landfall. Thank goodness it took its time to deal with its infighting. But ultimately, you had Beryl, where you had plenty of time to prepare, unless you were in the Lesser Antilles, which that was not a very good ride from what I've seen from all the damage and all that. And yeah, that's just kind of the thing. Whereas with Ian in this potential system, where it kind of just comes out of nowhere in the Western Caribbean Sea, now you just have 2 days to react, if you have that at all, and that's a lot more difficult to react to than you have with a Beryl type of situation. I've been rambling on too much about this. I'm just going to go ahead and get to the wind shear. Here's the wind shear that we have pulled up for you right here. The wind shear for the next several days continues to be very low. Yes, there is a little bit to the north of it, but that's not going to persist for too long. It's going to move into the Caribbean Sea, and it's going to have some better conditions to work with. And like I said on yesterday's video, it's not if the conditions are going to be good or not. It's how good are they for tropical development. And ultimately, they're pretty damn good, but the thing that's stopping the system from starting to just really blow up and rapidly intensify, at least not yet, is mainly because you have a situation where it's kind of hooked up to this monsoon and needs to detach and then form its own entity. That's the main thing. It's getting in its own way right now, which short term, that is some good news, but long term, that could result in another one of those sneaky scenarios like Ida and Ian. So that's what we're paying attention to with the conditions. Let's go ahead and show you some ensemble runs as well, because we are continuing to watch this and we are continuing to monitor this. Let me go ahead and move this a little bit, the screen a little bit to the left right here. This is the European 0Z ensembles right here. The European 0Z, look at how strong this gets. You're noticing this. You're initially not seeing much tropical development with the ensembles until you get to the Central Caribbean Sea. But then once you get to the Western Caribbean, then you have things starting to escalate. And that's the thing that I am worried about, where this system is kind of weak. A lot of people go, oh, it's not going to really do anything. Next thing you know, it explodes to a major hurricane and you have 48 hours to react. And it's one of those scenarios that really scare the bejesus out of me. And I want to check the 12Z run from yesterday just to kind of compare and contrast right there. There was definitely a lot more ensembles for the 0Z as confidence has grown on those runs. But I have looked at some of the 12Z operational runs, and they're not as sure of the system organizing or developing, at least not initially at this current point. The operational runs have been very inconsistent with this system, and that's why I've been mainly using the ensemble runs, because they're more consistent, and at least I can look at the trends of them a little bit better. Whereas the operational runs, you see a major hurricane one run, tropical storm the next, then a category 2, then a category 3, then a tropical depression, then a category 3, and this system doesn't develop at all. It's just so mind-boggling and just so back and forth that using the ensembles for me is something that I'm more comfortable with. Not trying to ignore the operational runs at all. They might be onto some stuff with it, but the inconsistency is what's been the problem with me not showing them as much as I'd like to. Whereas with consistent operational runs, then you can start talking. Then I can look at that and go, okay, they're definitely onto something. So that's why I haven't been showing them. I will show some of them just to show you a little bit of the inconsistency. But regardless, this is the European right here. And the point I'm trying to make with this is the vast majority of these runs want this to enter the Gulf of Mexico. Now, I have seen an increasing amount of model runs having this ram towards Belize and ram towards the Bay of Campeche over there. And that's a trend we're going to have to watch. But ultimately, that's something we're going to have to basically watch, and it's definitely a scenario, and it's definitely going to be something I'm watching. I know I just said that again, but it's going to determine how strong the Bermuda High is, because the Bermuda High is what's been pushing this system into the Caribbean Sea so far. Is it going to get too strong and push it and ram it into the Central America? That's hard to tell because of how far out that is. But what we do know is the majority of these ensembles want this to enter the Gulf of Mexico, and I have seen the 0Z European ensembles want this to impact parts of Florida over here, while I would say the overall average is Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama so far. But don't take my word for it. Nothing is set in stone. I want to check the GFS ensembles as well. GFS ensembles haven't been nearly as consistent in those regards. I can go ahead and show you this. Here's the 12Z GFS right here. We are seeing an increase of GFS ensembles, and they do want them to impact the Gulf of Mexico and head towards Louisiana, towards Texas, towards Mississippi, those areas right there. But right now, there's a bunch of inconsistency with the GFS ensembles, so we're going to have to keep very close tabs on that. And one last thing I do want to say before I end this video right here is you got to watch the trends. You got to see how this is going. Yes, the operational runs are very inconsistent, but you have to keep an eye on them and don't take them at face value. Take all these runs with a grain of salt. Nothing is set in stone. All I'm here to do is keep you updated on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us at Storms United and be a part of the conversation, or just to hang out and have a little bit of fun, be sure to join the Discord server. Link to that is in the pinned comment below. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. If you want to be an official sponsor or a friend of Pat as well, and my Patreon, be sure to join that. It's in the first link in the description down below. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.